When it comes to pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, there are a lot of topics about women's health, period, that are completely taboo and off the table. Today, we are going to bring those all out in the open and so much more, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the Sarah Kleiner Wellness YouTube channel. Today I have Dr. Nathan Riley on the channel to talk about a lot of taboo topics when it comes to women's health, pregnancy, birth, postpartum. And I actually did have to edit out for YouTube so I don't lose my channel the very last part of our conversation, which is about HPV and a particular intervention for HPV. So if you want to watch that full conversation, head on over to Spotify or Apple and make sure you subscribe to the Evolving Wellness podcast. Now, this episode here on YouTube does have quite a bit that probably will ruffle some feathers and hopefully not get the channel into too much trouble. So there was a lot more editing I could have done, but we'll just fingers crossed see what happens. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. All of Dr. Nathan's information is in the show notes for you. And I want to thank a couple sponsors really quickly of the show. Viva Rays, my source for circadian glasses. You can use the code YOGI to save over at Viva Rays. They have great eye masks and earplugs as well. And then Upgraded Formulas. They are a fantastic source for magnesium, and they have a wonderful hair tissue mineral analysis with a consultation. If you're wondering about the mineral status of your body, my code to save there is YOGI12 or YOGI if you have already used that one before. I am also still running my December specials as of the date of this recording. So make sure that you check those out, linked in the show notes. You can save up to 50% on some of these courses that I offer. And without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I am super excited to have today's guest with you. We're going to look at women's health from a little bit of a different lens than your classical lens. So thank you so much for being here. If you wouldn't mind just telling my audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm a board certified OBGYN. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. I've played sports my whole life. I'm pretty invested in, utilizing lifestyle modification for preventing disease. And I'm like deeply compassionate around this ongoing issue we have within maternity care and the early childhood period. And in my practice, I get a lot of people who are probably people, like you, who in your audience who are, not like get that there's probably some reason, like good reason to have surgeons and antibiotics and operating rooms and emergency room bays and trauma teams and all of that. But frankly, from the standpoint of getting people healthy, reversing disease, and really trying to enforce various environmental factors that can either improve or become detrimental to our health. That is really not the role. It never has been the role of our healthcare system. And so that puts quite a bit of pressure on me to help people look outside the box and outside the bounds of what we would consider medicine in order to get their health and the health of their kids and their families on board. So I am a very busy man nowadays, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, before we turn on the cameras, we were kind of talking about how the last 4 years or so have really brought a lot of people seeking out this type of information where they're like, wait a second, maybe, shoving antibiotics down my throat or my kids' throats, not the best course of action. Maybe this medical model that we have, which is largely suppressive, is not what I need to do for health and longevity and happiness. And so I think a lot of people are, like you said, you're busy. They're really interested in this information. And I haven't had an OBGYN on the podcast before that really looks at health through this lens. So yeah, I'm excited to see what's just curiosity. What's your most common patient that you deal with?
Well, it's probably a combination between, people that are really struggling with their fertility and people who are struggling to navigate the information or support they've been given, whether it's from midwives or doctors or whoever, around their pregnancy, because perhaps something happened in a previous pregnancy that, makes them feel a little bit, I don't know, disillusioned, maybe a little bit less excited about giving birth again in the hospital. So I've really struggled to keep up with keep the ball rolling from the standpoint of how many requests I'm getting. But,
Mm.
Somebody might just have a question about like, have you done a post about GBS? And I'm like, there's not, or a natural remedy for whatever. And it's like,
Right.
if we're going to look at this just through the lens of prescribing medicines, you might as well just go to your doctor. That's what
Yeah.
actually Western medicine does poorly, is
Yeah.
this prescriptive model.
Yep.
If you go to an herbalist and they say, or if you go to your fancy, I don't know what, you're in Atlanta, so you probably don't have
Hmm.
Sprouts, but you probably have something
We have
similar.
Sprouts. We
You
have
have Sprouts,
Sprouts,
okay.
Whole Foods.
So when you
Yeah.
go to like the little like medication supplement section, there'll be a little row of homeopathic remedies.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Homeopathy, just like Western medicine, has been corrupted in such a way that people think you can just go and do a couple weekends
Oh,
training
yeah.
to do this, and now
Mm-mm.
you
Mm-mm.
prescribe this for this problem. Like, I don't do natural remedies. There is
Mm-mm.
no quick fix. If you developed endometriosis, there's no quick fix. It's going to
Mm-mm.
take months to years to get you on track. And if that's not something you're willing to do, if you want a silver bullet, I don't know why you're not going to the OBGYN, because
Right.
these natural remedies aren't necessarily any better. They're
Mm-mm.
just band-aids for your symptoms. So that's probably a roundabout way of saying I get a variety of questions, but most of the people I'm working with are really like one caveat I have is, for the next 10 days, 7 out of those 10 nights, you're going to sleep for 9 hours.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't do that, I'm not going to work with you.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is that I bet your symptoms will resolve in 10 days. At least in part, you're going to see something subside. But also, are you committed to doing this work? Because if
Yep.
you're looking for a quick fix, like, I'd rather you go see a surgeon. I really don't care. So it's not that I don't care. Like, deep in my heart, I care. But like, frankly, I can't take everybody. You have to be really
Right.
committed to doing this work. And so, anyways, yeah, it's a mix of things. Pregnancy is probably the most common question I'm getting now, because I think people are really compelled to take care of themselves in such a way that their baby's going to have the greatest health and lifespan
Yeah.
after this baby comes earthside.
Yeah. And there's so many issues with fertility. I
Oh
had no
yeah,
idea it was such a huge crisis until, I was struck after 2020. I'm like, I have to have a baby. Like, shit. I
yeah,
am 40, 41. My time is running out. I have to have a baby. And so, obviously there's statistics where your fertility drops as you get older. I mean, that's just biology, right?
yeah. It should. It's supposed to drop. If it
Yeah,
doesn't drop, it's not like it's not controversial. It's not conspiratorial.
no,
You're going to have a harder time getting pregnant when you're 41.
right,
Period.
exactly.
Compared to 21, let's say.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was difficult. I had multiple miscarriages, and then I decided to try IVF, which we had 2 rounds of, didn't work, and found Dr. Cruz, quantum biology, circadian biology, started implementing those things really strictly, got off the functional medicine train of all the supplements and all the crap, got pregnant, and had a healthy baby boy through that stuff. But in that process, through going through fertility clinics and through going through
Yeah.
losses, you go online and you're looking for camaraderie, and you're looking for, because you're just like, I'm so lonely in this is so sad and devastating. And you see the crisis going on with women in their 20s, and then getting into a fertility clinic, the wait was like 6 months long,
Oh,
you know
it's
and they were
multi-billion dollars now every
like,
year.
I
Yeah.
called every clinic in town after, my second miscarriage. I was like, well, I'm doing IVF. Screw it. I can't go through this another time. This is so horrible. I'm going through it. And I couldn't get an appointment for like 6 months. And then when I would go in the waiting room to the clinic that I did go to, I wasn't the old, I wasn't it wasn't just women my age. It was women in their 20s and I was shocked. I'm like, what in the heck are all these young women doing in a fertility clinic? Yes, me 40, 41, 42 makes a little bit more sense, but women in their 20s, why?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're seeing it too, just women having a really tough time in their 20s and 30s getting pregnant right now. Are you seeing that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's unfortunately it's a lot of my practice, but I don't want to excuse me, I don't want to be doing that work.
No.
And it's not because I don't like doing it, but frankly, like, I don't think I'm the best at it. And what I'm doing when I'm able to dedicate multiple hours per day with a person, like, to really understand every facet that might be coming in here, they do well and they get pregnant, like
Mhm.
almost without fail. But that
Mhm.
requires such an investment of my time that I just can't, because I've got all these other fires that I'm, fighting, from vaccines to circumcision to
Mm.
induction
Oh,
to
yeah.
C-section to VBAC. I mean, the list just goes on and on. So
Mhm.
yeah, I am definitely seeing a huge decline, and I think it's multifactorial, but
Mm.
um, that might be a whole hour long, conversation in of itself. But we can go there. I mean, we can get into the fertility stuff if you'd like.
Well, I mean, maybe just like a Cliff Notes version, because I have my theories. I'm curious if I'm sure they match up with yours, but yeah, maybe like a Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to consider first and foremost, like we're actually starting from an incomplete model. And that
Mm.
model is that there's an egg and a sperm and they meet and they make a baby. It's
Mm.
not an egg and a sperm. It's actually perhaps cooperative on the side of the follicles, who are all helping to nourish one another such that one ultimately achieves ovulation, right? But of course, there's all these other endocrine players and autocrine players and nutrient players and cofactors and enzymes and whatnot that need to make that possible. But then on the side of the sperm, and by the way, I think up to about 70% of suboptimal fertility is due to the guys. And I think the
Oh,
guys are
yeah.
said, oh, you've got 15 million plus sperm, you're fine. No, guys, you are not fine. In fact, if you've got one of these in your pockets, you probably have suboptimal sperm
Mm.
counts, which 50
Yep.
years ago would have been like 100 million. Now it's 15 to 20 million. Like, this is a catastrophe on the horizon. And you've got one of these in your pocket. You've got four powerful modems connecting to God knows how many different cell towers, and they're right next to your testicles all day long. So this egg and sperm thing it's not complete. And all that I have to do to demonstrate that to somebody is show you a video of IVF happening. They don't just add the
Mhm.
strongest sperm, they add tens of thousands of healthy
Mhm.
sperm,
Yep.
and they all surround the egg three-dimensionally, and they're all bumping into the egg. The egg starts rotating, and then at some point one of those sperm are engulfed, right? And all of the other sperm, suspect, are actually all there as support, like playing a support role, like so the beach ball doesn't move out of the way. It's like we're all in this together, and the egg is kind of pushing back, and there's this rotational movement, and bam, we've got this ignition, and now the genetic material is mixing. But if the genetic material of the sperm, we talk so much about the health of the egg, the
Mhm.
AMH, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm. Mhm.
If the health of a morphologically, even strong modal sperm isn't intact, that DNA is not intact, you're going to end up with an incomplete blueprint and a miscarriage. And then the woman is going to think, why am I so broken? Why is this not
Mhm.
working? We have to be talking about oxidative stress and how that damages the very genetic material that's going to build a baby. And until we get beyond the one egg, one sperm model, we're going to continue to spend billions every year on these fertility treatments.
Mhm.
And frankly, I don't think it's necessary for most
Mm-mm.
cases.
Mm-mm.
Um, and in some cases, I actually think it's very harmful to people's health
Agree.
to be going through
Agree.
that. So I'll leave it at that. But I mean, that should give enough for people to chew on, I think, to understand that our whole approach from the REI OBGYN standpoint, which I learned, I took tests, I was board certified, I did all of that, and I still don't think it's right. So we have a
Yeah,
big problem there.
I agree. Yeah, and it's the information when you go through this, it's like that's what your doctor is going to recommend right away. It's not like there's a whole lot of information out there until people find people like you or people like me who are more willing to talk about these other factors that
Right.
influence fertility, like non-native EMFs, disrupted circadian rhythms, poor sleep,
Oh yeah.
endocrine disruptors,
Critical.
like all this stuff. Your standard doctor is never going to mention it to you.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's the same doctor that also recommended birth control when you were 14 because your
Right.
periods were off. Like,
Mhm.
whose period is not
You're
off at
supposed to be off
14?
for the
It's supposed to
first
be
2
off.
years, right? Like
Yeah. It's like trying to control the weather. It's like consistently chaotic, the
Yep.
weather. You have no
Yep.
idea what's gonna happen tomorrow, but it's like an AFib heart pattern. It's like regularly irregular. I guess
Mhm.
AFib is irregularly irregular, but my point being that it's chaotic, but it's at least consistently chaotic.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's exactly what we're looking at here with this early period thing. But we put a young woman on birth control and use this kind language like, oh, honey, it's so hard to have periods and this and that. And guys, I get it. If you're listening, it's a white guy, never had periods. I've got little girls though. And I'm going to try to help
Yep.
them understand that there's a period of chaos here. And that's actually
Mhm.
a beautiful part of you being embodied with the power that is your feminine creative force. Like, this is important.
Mhm.
And I know it's embarrassing, and I wish the kids at school weren't so, mean or cruel. But if we don't educate young women and instead we just squelch their magical powers to procreate, no wonder so many women and men are having issues getting pregnant later because
Yeah,
they've never had their magic. They were stripped
right.
away of that magic, at age 15. And so it's no surprise that when you get on the medical train that all of these other things happen, including the inductions and the controlling
Mhm.
nature in the birth process. So um, I have a deep compassion for my colleagues. I think they're all doing their very best, but I'm not interested in perpetuating that. I'd like to see us go a little bit of a sort of a couple, a beeline, maybe like a couple degrees east of north,
Mhm.
to get us on track, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then when you get to actually getting pregnant, it's like a whole, it's like when I
Oh,
was
yeah.
trying to get pregnant, I was so focused on like the just getting pregnant part that I didn't really give a lot of thought to the provider I was going to use when I actually did get pregnant because I had had so many false starts. And then, we are confirmed that we're pregnant, and I'm like, I do not want to go to this doctor that's going to force me to get an ultrasound every week of my pregnancy because I'm 42, 43
Yeah.
years old,
Yeah.
and they are going to want to do all these ultrasounds, which I don't think are safe.
We could
Um,
talk about that. Yeah.
yeah, I would love to because I got a lot
Interesting.
of flack about that when I kind of talked. I didn't talk a ton about it on my public profile, but I did occasionally mention, only ultrasounds that I'm getting are the anatomy scan. I chose to get that one. Um, and I didn't comply with the ultrasounds after that anatomy scan. I was like, I don't need to get one every week just because of my age. I just don't need to do that.
Couldn't
And
agree more.
I'm glad I didn't. I didn't comply with a lot of things. Even when I did switch to a midwife, they were still pushing a lot of stuff on me. And so, yeah, maybe we can talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah. Where do we start? First off, let me also say that like good for you for getting pregnant naturally because actually had you gone the route of assisted reproductive technology, specifically IVF, while we could force your body to get pregnant, it becomes an independent risk factor for a variety of pregnancy
Mm,
complications. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't have IVF. Like, thank
right.
goodness that we've developed these incredible technologies. However, if we're not looking upstream and turning over every stone before that process in order to optimize your health to the best of our ability, your willingness, your resources, whatever, you predispose yourself to a variety of pregnancy related complications, all of which are actually contributing to our maternal morbidity and mortality, as well as our
Wow.
our neonatal morbidity and mortality. And and frankly, people want to blame the doctors, but like, listen, the doctors are serving a role. You, as the consumer, have gone and said, "We've tried everything. We're gonna do this thing now," and the doctors is meeting the demand. Our healthcare system
Hmm.
is meeting the demands
Hmm.
of a very impatient, oftentimes poorly accountable population, right? And I'm not
Yes.
talking about like socioeconomics and whatnot. That is a big, giant part of this conversation. But, I've got very rich white friends who have every advantage that people want to throw at me as a means of trying to discredit what I'm saying. And they're developing preeclampsia and
Hmm.
gestational diabetes. They're going for IVF. They're doing all these things because they have the money to do it and they don't even think
Hmm.
about it.
Right.
But because you're not super healthy on either a physical, mental, emotional, or even spiritual level, you're bound to have issues with this rite of passage.
Hmm.
And so good on you for doing that. And if a person ends up going through that path, I would highly encourage people to really consider how are you taking care of yourself during the growth of this baby to ensure that you have as many options as possible. So where do you want to start with the whole pregnancy conversation?
Yeah. I mean, I think just from the get go, what issues do you see with how women are treated in pregnancy? Because when I was seeing the standard doctor, they're like, we're going to, and sorry for my male listeners, I don't have a ton, but, they were trying to force me to get a pap smear at my 8 week and trying to force me to do like all these vaginal ultrasounds. And so I think that sometimes those are, good if you want to confirm that heartbeat, especially if you've had multiple losses. That might be the
Yeah,
only way to do that. Um, but what issues do you see with those types of interventions for women?
sure. So there are a couple ways to do an ultrasound. So we'll start with ultrasound because that actually is a really interesting topic that not a lot of people ask. So I appreciate the question. Ultrasound is basic. It's sort of like the stethoscope of the OBGYN. You know, we carry
Mhm.
stethoscopes, but we don't listen to hearts the way that primary care docs or cardiologists do. Like we just don't spend that much time listening to heart. We know that you're going to have a flow murmur. We may hear like something that sounds a little abnormal and send you to the cardiologist or MFM for EKGs. Like, but we're not using stethoscopes. What we do is we whip out an ultrasound for almost every
Mhm.
single problem, and we are very, very good with an ultrasound. Like
Mhm.
the only person that's probably better with an ultrasound is probably your ER doc who's looking for blood inside the abdomen after abdominal trauma. And they're not even that great at looking at the fetus, right? So we've got this great tool. And when you are trained to use this tool every time you see a person, because we might find something, you start to use it every single time you're anywhere near a pregnant person.
Mhm.
And what we've used, you know, in the past to justify not doing x-rays and CT scans, which is basically a series of x-rays rapidly done, a CT scan, also called a CAT scan.
Mhm.
What we've the rationalization for not using those are ionizing forms of radiation, meaning that if I take an atom and I blast it with that frequency of radio waves. They're not really radio waves, but of on the spectrum. We're talking, you know, you're like into quantum biology and whatnot, but on the
Mhm.
spectrum, you're going to have slow moving and fast moving
Mhm.
waves. A very, very high powered wave, a very high frequency wave is going to have a shorter wavelength that it's going to be able to knock electrons and other subatomic particles out of the atom. And that atom now becomes unstable, right? And so you end up with you know, looking at potentially detriments to the, you know, the DNA, the genetic material, or even a developing embryo who hasn't fully formed itself when it has
Yes.
rapidly dividing cells. So, hey, we say don't use ionizing radiation, use non ionizing radiation, for example, ultrasound. And so we have felt like this is a totally safe thing. And frankly, many of us, including me and you, probably were ultrasounded several times in our pregnancy. But nowadays, we're doing it every single visit,
Every time, because like with my
every visit.
daughter, I didn't get it. I got one ultrasound at 9 weeks just to confirm that she was there, and then one at 20 weeks, and that was it. And they didn't even
Right,
offer me, and I was also 28 years old, but they didn't even
right,
offer me another ultrasound. I wanted one. I was like, I want to see the baby. I want to see the baby. They're like, no, you don't need another ultrasound. This pregnancy is 8 weeks. I mean, there's like
all the time.
constant all
Yeah,
the time. Every time I would go
right,
in the office, I'm like, I got to get out of this freaking practice. You know,
right,
I can't,
right,
this is not okay.
right. So the rationale behind doing ultrasounds is um, we might find something that's abnormal and then we can act
Hmm.
on that. And because
Hmm.
you're higher risk because of your age, you're an
Hmm.
elderly multigravid, you're 41. I mean, you're about to just fall apart in front of our eyes. We want to know, is there some structural issue there? Maybe there's an aneuploidy like Down syndrome or whatever.
Yeah.
Great, let's look for it. But why are we doing this every 4 weeks again? Like what
Right.
exactly are we hoping to do with this information? So going back to the ultrasound machine in itself, there's various settings. Some of those settings just give you like a black and white kind of speckly picture that most people don't even know how to interpret. People like
Hmm.
me look at these all the time, so I know what I'm looking at. But we can also go better. We can actually increase the frequency and we can change it from a pulse emission to a continuous high frequency emission. And that will allow us to look at color flowing, blood flowing to and from the probe. So we can look at the structure of the heart and we can look at where early blood is circulating inside the fetus, which, by the way, animates the heart, not the other way around. We can get into that another time, but that is a completely different model of the heart when you look at an embryo developing and how blood is flowing. But the problem with this high frequency continuous, you know, wave emission setting on the ultrasound is that it is going to heat up the fluid a lot more than the black and white, you know,
Hmm.
boring ultrasound, but it gives us a lot more information. The issue with having more information is that there's a downside. And so because water heats up, add any matter heats up whenever you're blasting it with high frequency anything, that heat can also lead to issues with embryogenesis, the development of the internal organs, the embryo itself, the nervous system, or whatever. So, has this been studied and why aren't doctors talking about it? Yes, it has, but not in the United States.
Mm.
United States, we've convinced ourselves that it's totally safe. But if you go to
Hmm.
China, They have a whole bunch of studies. In fact, there's a book that everybody out there can go and get on Amazon. It's called 50 Human Studies by Jim West. I think he's an MD, but he basically took a whole bunch of data from China, all these studies that looked at in utero exposure to various settings on the ultrasound, and it determined that there might actually be some really bad downsides to blasting a baby with continuous wave high frequency ultrasound every week or every couple
Wow.
weeks. Specifically the sensitive structures like the glomeruli of the kidneys, a lot of the brain structures. I mean, they're seeing neurodevelopmental issues. I mean, we have
Mm,
this raging autism thing. I
right.
don't see any 65-year-olds with autism, and now I'm seeing every 10 kids with autism in our
Yeah.
country. So is it vaccines? Is it glyphosates? Is it ultrasound? Is it birth injuries? Probably a perfect
All of
storm
the
of all of those
above.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we're
Yeah,
not willing to ask that question, we're never going to get to the bottom. And parents like you are going to be left wondering, what the fuck happened to my child?
exactly.
And so my rules for ultrasound are only do an ultrasound or any study for that matter if you plan to act, if it's going to potentially change your care plan.
Mm-hmm.
Second, keep it as minimal and reduced
Mm-hmm.
in time and intensity as you possibly can.
Right.
And that's pretty much it, actually.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't
Yeah,
have a reason to do it, why are we doing it? It's cute to see
exactly.
the genitals and it's cute to see their face and all that, but like, frankly, is this really necessary if it's potentially going to cause harm? And if we're not saying there is potential harm, even though there's published data from China, and it's small data sets, like there's not a ton of data. But if there is some data, shouldn't we be at least saying, listen, we're not totally sure that this isn't harmful. So I'm happy to look at the babies, whatever, but let's keep it very brief, just a moment to look at the genitals if we need to know the sex, or a moment to look at the heart or the feet or whatever.
Right.
Um, that's where I think we can find a middle ground, like you and I were talking about before the recording. But people don't like middle grounds. They like to
No.
have a very clear binary of right and wrong.
Yeah, that's tough for people. And, and I've known people, a really good friend of mine who has a pretty large social media following. She's shared about it recently. Um, she lives here in north of Atlanta. She is, I think, in her late 30s. And so, of course, everyone was on her when she was pregnant. It was high risk, you're older, and ended up, doing the 20-week anatomy scan. Nothing was found. She was planning a home birth. The baby came really quickly before she could even set anything up, and she knew immediately there was a problem. And he has got CDH, and so I don't know if you're familiar with that condition, but it's pretty serious. I think that
Congenital diaphragmatic hernia, is that what you're?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, 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 yeah, and he's still in the NICU after, I guess, like the last 3.5 months. But people were just hating on her. Oh, you're all natural and holistic. You're getting what you deserved. But I'm like, she got the 20-week ultrasound, but they missed this. This is something that's supposed to catch on the ultrasound. So it's just like, even if you do get the ultrasound and all of that stuff, you may not catch everything. It's not a foolproof. It's not foolproof,
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very sad story that I can share very briefly about a baby that had been even seen by the high-risk OBGYNs, which are called maternal fetal medicine
Mm-hmm.
specialists. They are
Mm-hmm.
really, really, really great,
Thorough. Oh yeah.
thorough doctors, like no doubt about it. However, they are also very much focused so much on the data that they tend to sometimes lose the forest through the trees. And I have a number of people that are still in my circles, sort of, who are MFMs, and I say sort of because over the period of COVID, I lost a lot of professional colleagues who thought it was wacky that I wasn't recommending this injection to
Oh
pregnant women
God.
before we had data, but we can get into that later. So this woman who was pregnant with her third had gone in for all of her routine prenatal visits. For some reason she had also gone to an MFM for another ultrasound, and everything looked fine with the baby, but she ended up coming in with PPROM, which is pre-labor premature rupture of membranes, and
Mm.
a premature pre-labor rupture of membranes. Anyways, it's not a good thing. You don't want your baby to come out and have the waters open at 32 weeks, but that's what
Oh
happened.
no.
A couple
Oh
days
no.
later, she gave birth, and so this baby came out. I was there taking care of the mom, and the baby's out, and like more and more people are filing in behind me, and this little baby is not breathing. So we're like,
Mm.
holy shit, what's going on? So finally, my client was I say client because you're not sick because you're pregnant. For those out there
Right.
who are wondering, like, I'm not a businessman. I just am not a. I'm providing a service to somebody who's paying for that service. So, anyways, she has like a little bit of a hemorrhage. We get that under control, and I go and see what's going on with the baby. We bring mom in, to see, and apparently this baby is not doing well. They have,
Mm.
by the time we get there, have many surgeons, pediatric surgeons, and whatnot, have cut open the sort of the area where your clavicles meet. It's where we would put a tracheostomy, like
Mm-hmm.
MacGyver style, to help you breathe through a tube, and they're breathing for the baby. And so somebody finally comes out. The MFM, I think, is in there, and he and one of the pediatric surgeons take me aside because I'm the chief resident, and they're like, "We have a problem here. This baby's missing 4 centimeters of trachea, so there's
Oh
no
my
way of connecting
gosh.
air from the mouth to the lungs. We have no fix for this." So she had gone in for a level 2 ultrasound, like the formal anatomy
Wow.
scan, and we still didn't see it. And that's just the reality. There is a
Yep.
sensitivity to these scans, but they're not going to show everything.
Yep.
So on the one hand, we could say we need to scan more and scan longer. Or do we just say, hey, listen, sometimes there's actually things that we're not going to be able to detect or fix. And our God sort of perception of our role as physicians, or the demands of the consumers on us as physicians, has to be limited. We have to push
Mm-hmm.
that down a little bit, because there are certain things that we just can't prevent or predict.
Yep.
And what we need to actually get better at doing is taking care of people when this happens. So this woman had to hold her little girl, and the little
Ugh.
girl passed away, and she eventually had to use get the fuck out of here. Like, they're trying to adjust her blankets, and this little girl's
Ugh.
dying in her arms, and
Oh
it's
my
like,
God.
and I mean, as soon as she screamed at everybody to get out, you could hear a pin drop, and I was the only one who stayed with one of the nurses, and she just let her baby die in her arms. And um, my fellowship training is in end of life care. And so this is a part of the reason that I wanted to go into that, is that, like, listen, we're immortal. Like, there are certain things that are going to happen. And if we as physicians, labor and delivery nurses, nurse practitioners, midwives, just a Joe Schmo walking on the street, if we don't have a way of realizing that our presence sometimes is all that is needed, no language, no documentation, no questions, no baloney blankets, like, sometimes you just need to just be still and let this moment
Mm-hmm.
happen, and like realize that this person is holding their baby who had been
Ugh.
growing inside of them for 32 weeks. Their baby is losing color and stopping breathing right now. Is there anything more important? Doesn't matter what your boss
Mm-mm.
says, what the computer is alarming, needs to happen. Some checkbox hasn't been checked, like, is there anything more important right now for the entirety of the universe than this baby just being honored and revered for the maybe 5 minutes that they were alive?
Yeah.
And by the way, those 5 minutes, they were surrounded by love. They were in their mother's arms, just being loved on,
Mm.
which maybe 100, maybe 99% of their life then was spent being loved, versus maybe 5% that many of us feel we were
Right.
loved throughout our full adult lives. So to
Mm.
say that something is fair or not fair, or cruel or uncruel, is not relevant. It's actually not even a part of my conversation. So, anyways, ultrasound is very, very limited, and
Mm.
sometimes we miss things, and we
Yeah.
have to be okay with that too.
Yeah. It's tough. Yeah. Because I think the thing is, people just want, and it's everywhere. If you're in the health space, period, they want these definitive protocols and they want
Mm,
definitive
that's
answers,
right.
and they want, the prescription or the homeopathic remedy. And it's the gray area, the ambiguous area is like everything is not under your control. Everything is not under the doctor's control.
Sad but true. Sad
it's
but true.
there's a certain amount of surrender you have to have, and having a child is like the ultimate surrender, I think. I have a lot of
Yeah.
friends who don't have children, but like I on it my husband and I are like, we it's hard to relate
Yeah.
to somebody talking about their problems when they haven't really like gone through the whole pregnancy and delivery and then having a child, like, and going through having your heart on the outside of
Sure.
your body. Essentially, that's what my husband keeps saying. He's like, how the heck do people do this? Like, your heart is like walking around outside your body all the time,
Mm.
and like you can't control it. And it's been a big huge lesson for both of us, because we've got my daughter, she's got a lot of chronic issues, and then now we have a 14-month-old son, and so it's just like trying to balance it
It's
all
amazing.
and
Yeah.
be
S
human and live life. It's a lot. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't from the standpoints of the gravity of this whole parenting thing, frankly, I think where we would probably have to start to fix whatever that even means, to fix something, to fix our maternity care system. There's a lot of great organizations that are doing
Hmm.
great work, that are selling programs and courses that are about
Yes.
the evidence and being informed. And Instagram is loaded with this. And it's like,
Oh,
guys,
loaded. Yeah.
we are not deplete on information. Like, I've got a program that is absolutely the most comprehensive, banging program you will ever encounter. It is built on the legacy of these other programs, and it takes it to the 100th level. And that's still not enough to change our system. It's not just
Mm-mm.
education.
Mm-mm.
We also need to inspire and empower people to take accountability. But most importantly, when you become a parent, we need to make you the center of your universe, of our universe. Like,
Mm-hmm.
our entire society needs to be built around supporting a woman postpartum,
Yeah.
because we don't know what their experience was. You are not entitled to have a living child or a
Right.
healthy
Right.
Harvard graduate. I'm sorry, that's not a part of the deal when you get pregnant.
Nope.
And we're also throwing a bunch of harmful things at them. So, like, what are
Hmm.
we trying to do here? Are we trying to prevent people from dying? Are we trying to
Yeah.
to help families grow stronger? And
Right.
I don't suspect anywhere in your story, Sarah, that anybody put you really at the center of the conversation. And I feel like that is the biggest injury we could have done to you. Like, forget all the other stuff, the blood loss and all the other metrics.
Right.
Not putting you at the center actually is so damaging to you and how you are able to show up for other people, because you had a baby. Like, what is
Yeah.
more important to our species, our communities, than you going through the work of growing and then giving birth? And then maybe we harmed, her, maybe.
Yeah.
But, like, who is there to help you?
Right.
Nobody. It's
Right.
just Sarah out there trying to navigate this with her partner and hoping it doesn't happen in your next pregnancy. That's what so many women feel. And that is such a
Yeah.
sad, sad thing.
Yeah, it is. It's scary too, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
it's really scary, and we don't support the women and we don't educate them. And like you
Right.
said, there's a plethora of information on Instagram. That's how I found you, because I was pregnant finally with my son, and then I'm like, "Oh crap, I finally got pregnant." Now I have this whole other thing, pregnancy and birth and postpartum, that I have to navigate, that my doctor is definitely not going to help me figure this out. I have to advocate for myself every step of the way. And, I'm blessed to have resources and to
Yeah.
have, enough money to have a doula there with me, and be able to, I wanted to do everything at home, but my husband he has one foot in, like, my wife is like doing all this interesting natural stuff, but also I don't quite trust her 100% because she's a little crazy. And so I had to do this, like, find a hospital that was an hour from here, that's used to dealing with women like me that don't want a hep lock, that don't want the child vaccinated, that don't want the child circumcised, they don't want anything. They want to leave the hospital as soon as they can. We were able to leave within 24 hours, but it's an hour from here because it's a podunk hospital, but it's like all the crunchy moms know about it. But I never would have known about that if I hadn't been able to
Sure.
find resources and educate myself, and that's the thing. Like, that's what I love doing with having a podcast and having my channel, is that hopefully I can let people know that there are options out there for you, right? You
Yeah.
don't have to consent to everything your doctor says. And nothing on this podcast is medical advice by any means, but I think that we're just so used to saying yes and okay and just consenting to all these things that are possibly harmful to our bodies and our babies' bodies,
Yeah.
that we just don't know when to say yes and when to say no. I think it can be really, really confusing and
Yeah.
traumatic for people.
Yeah. I I don't know if I could have said that any better. Another element to this is that, I think we as a society need to reevaluate what is our goal? Like, what is our
Hmm.
actual goal?
Hmm.
If our goal is to um, only keep kids from getting a viral something, right?
Hmm.
And getting sick for a 24 to 48-hour period, getting
Hmm.
chickenpox or whatever, sure.
Right.
Let's do a vaccine. If that is our only goal and we can demonstrate that it's effective, then yes. but that goal needs to come with some conditions. We can achieve this goal, but we can't do these other harms, right? But if our only goal is, hey, at all costs, we got to prevent the kids from getting chickenpox, which, by the way, it probably
I
is
had
miserable.
that.
I had it.
mean,
It
we
was
had
itchy.
chickenpox parties. We're like,
We'd
hey,
all
my
get
kid's got the
together.
chickenpox. Go
Yeah.
spend the night at her house so
Go
you can
hang
get it
out with
too.
her.
And so you can
Yeah.
have it and we don't have to deal with this again. Like, just go get the chickenpox. Like, that's,
Right. Go rub up on Katie's little open sores. Yeah,
right.
exactly. I mean, it was just sort of like something, it was like almost like a rite of passage as a kid,
Right.
you know?
Yes.
And
Yep.
our whole, even our perception of fever in children is
Oh
that,
my gosh. I just went through that with my baby and it's like, my
yeah,
husband's like,
it's
give him Tylenol. I'm like, no, no.
yeah, it's a fever. It's probably uncomfortable.
He needs to have this. His
It's
immune system is developing. He needs to.
absolutely.
I'm like, this is a good thing. He's getting rid of something, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like whenever you heat up steel in order to purify it,
Mm,
you actually heat it up and the impurities rise to the surface. And then you can, like, you know, the blacksmith knocks it a bunch of times and all these impurities fall out. The more time that you do that, the more tempered the steel and the stronger the steel becomes. So if our only goal is for kids to not have fever, forget that there's a very narrow therapeutic window of acetaminophen, Tylenol, and
right.
forget that that can cause liver issues and long-term health issues. We
Low
don't want kids to
glutathione. Yeah.
have fever. Yeah. So if we take that same, which this, I think most people listening would say, that sounds like that makes a lot of sense. If we then look at childbirth and um, we have determined, Sarah, that our only goal is to have a living mom and a living baby.
Right. That's
And
the
every
yeah.
single thing that is introduced to you during your pregnancy or any pregnancy. I just had a friend who used to live across the street. She called, she's like, I'm pregnant again. My husband's going to get a vasectomy later, but here we go. She's 41 and she's thinking about having a home birth. And I had to reiterate, listen, all of the stuff that people are doing, it's coming from a place of love. They have all signed on to help the society achieve one thing, which is to never have a baby or a mother die in childbirth.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
is unfortunately it's as improbable as we're going to live forever and move to Mars. Like, it's just not a part of being a biological entity. There has to be some mothers and babies that die. Fortunately, that's very, very minimal, and we can reduce that. But when we start saying, I am willing to violate your body and shove my hand in places that you have not invited me into, and cause you some actual emotional and mental distress that leads to trauma because nobody actually identified it as a violation of your consent or your bodily autonomy. And we do this in the name of checking on baby and keeping the baby healthy. What we are saying is that our only goal is to make sure that that baby does not die. That baby could end up with cerebral palsy, could end up with a totally messed up gut microbiome and lead to sorts of allergies and autoimmune conditions later, could lead to fertility issues if you jack them up full of vaccines starting day one of life with hepatitis B.
Yep.
Like, we are willing to compromise every other thing that helps us tick just to ensure the single goal, the primary goal of getting you and your baby out of this place intact. And that's why I think so many women are starting to say, well, hold on. You're saying you're willing to traumatize me by doing these things and giving me coercive language, you know, through which I'm going to consent to things, all in the name of that one goal. But what if that's not the same goal that you have? Like, what if you don't share that as the only goal? That having a living mom and living baby should be like foundationally, like, we're all hoping for that, but is that the end of the game? Is that the end of the story? Like, I feel like we should be asking for more than that, but we're not quite there. And the more technology and medicine we throw at this problem, I think the worse outcomes we're going to continue to get.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't think people know that they can say no to doctors. And then I don't think people know they have choices, you know, like that. We almost had my son in the car and we drove by Northside Hospital, which is the baby factory. I think it's like one of the biggest baby factories.
One of the biggest
in the world.
Next to, there's like one in Houston that I think out numbers them. But yeah, I think that the one in the north side of Atlanta, I've heard.
Yeah, Northside Hospital.
Stories.
That's where I was. I was actually born there in good old 1979. But yeah, we were driving by Northside to get to North Fulton, which is an hour from my house. And I was in labor. And I mean, this boy he was just coming. And my husband's like, I'm going to turn. I'm like, do not freaking, I was about to say a
We're
different word.
going to the other hospital.
Do not take me to Northside. Do not do it. I mean, they won't allow doulas in that hospital. I mean, maybe they've changed since my son was born 14 months ago, but they weren't allowing doulas. They made a rule in 2020 to not allow doulas, and then they decided, oh, this is great. We don't have to have these women here advocating for these women going through childbirth, and we don't have to fight with these women, because it was a lot of times a fight between the doctor and the doula, unfortunately, because that's a whole other freaking conversation.
Yeah.
But I was like, we're not going there, because my sister has given birth to both of her babies there, both horrible experiences. The last one was a C-section, completely unnecessary. And I was just like, no, I can't, I'm not gonna do that to myself or my son. But even this podunk hospital we went to, I call it podunk, I hope I don't offend anybody, but I had a birth plan. I walked in and I was 9 centimeters when I got there. They were like, you're gonna have a baby in like 15 minutes. I did very quickly after I got there. We're lucky he was born there, not in the car.
Yeah.
But I handed them my birth plan, and I'm like, can you do this? And they were like, they read the whole thing. They're like, yes, we can. So I don't think people know they can ask for things, and they can advocate for themselves, and they can advocate for the baby. I said, he is not to leave my site or my husband's site. If you want to do testing, one of us has to be with him at all times. Like, our level of trust is like like that much after what we went through with our daughter. I hope you're enjoying today's episode with Dr. Nathan. Again, all of his information is down in the show notes. And if you want the full unedited conversation, make sure to head over to the Evolving Wellness podcast on Spotify or Apple. And if you're listening here on YouTube, give us a like, leave us a comment to help get the show out to more people, and make sure to share it with a friend or family member, especially if they are going through any of the things that we talk about in this episode. I also want to remind you, I'm having December specials right now on my courses. You can save up to 50%. That will go away as of the new year. So make sure you take advantage of those. And I do have gift card options. If you have a loved one or a friend that you would like a gift a course to, you just select the gift card option under that December specials page, and you'll get directed to instructions to gift the program to someone. All right, let's go ahead and jump back into the episode. Thank you for watching. And the circumcision thing, which is I've done like one podcast on that, but that was the thing I had to deal with my husband, because he was just like, oh, hell no, we have to do that. Like, that, you're crazy. Like, he's going to get made fun of. And I was like, who's going to be looking at him? Like, come on, dude. Like, it was a whole thing with us. And I'm so glad we didn't do it,
Yeah.
What were you about to say about that?
Well, I do think we should talk about the circumcision thing. Let's talk about that first, but then I want to go back to what you're saying about the permission and what you can say no to and all of that, because I think we have to take that an extra step. But let's first quickly, I'll just mention about the circumcision thing. Circumcision is on the decline, fortunately. I think a lot of parents.
That's the way I convinced him. I'm like, let's look at the statistics of the kids being born now.
Right.
It's like a ton of them are not going through it. Thank goodness.
Yeah, it was like 90%, probably when I was born in the 80s. I was born in 85. 90%, probably down to about 40 to 60% now. It depends on who you ask. But even my pediatrician friends, they're like steadfast in the system. They're like, yeah, it seems like less people are doing circumcision. And it usually is because the dad was circumcised and baby's now going to match. But frankly, yeah, what you said is actually really, really relevant. If we're only worried about a kid being made fun of, first off, who's looking at this kid's penis and laughing at it? That really sucks anyways. But if this trajectory continues in that fashion, when that kid is, let's say, I don't even know if kids get naked in front of each other anymore, but let's say like, they do, like maybe 14 or 15 was maybe 15, like swimming class. Yeah.
PE, whatever. Yeah.
PE, right. And you were born 5 years, before me, or 6 years before me. And for you guys, it was maybe a little bit more common, but even nowadays, let's just assume we're in 1979, but the rate of circumcision is 50-50. Well, of course you can't uncircumcise, but we have 50% of kids that their parents didn't even glance at this. Like, no, we're not doing that. And then the other 50%, oh, you're going to match dad, right? Well, if you're worried about your kid being made fun of, there's 50% of kids with and without foreskin. And it's probably going to end up that if you end up on the side of continuing to do this very traumatic thing where these little boys are actually
Ugh,
experiencing chronic PTSD like symptoms for
it's sad.
into adulthood,
Hmm.
like this is not a
And they don't
benign
even know.
procedure.
Like it's,
Yeah, they don't even know. They've got all this stuff bound up and they don't know why they're so angry, anxious, afraid, so ashamed, like so much like why am I ashamed? I have nothing to be ashamed about. And maybe there was something to this process of strapping a little boy down
ugh,
against their will and showing you, hey, little boy, I can touch your genitals if I strap you down and I'm bigger and stronger than you. I can do whatever I want to your body. There might be some problem there.
hmm,
And I'm not going to say that it is. I'm not going to say that it isn't. I'm just going to say that sounds like a pretty shitty thing to do to a little
a
person who
baby that's
just
just
came
been
out of the womb.
born needs
Yeah.
to be with his mother,
Right.
and then
Right.
what kind of distrust is the baby going to have? That's what I'm like. What kind of distrust is the
Yeah.
baby going to have for the mother? That you let that happen to me. How could you do
Right.
that? It's
Right.
just we,
There's just so much to it. And I've
yeah.
done a number of the, I mean, I did maybe 200 or so. I don't even know, like a lot of them in residency because it's a part of your training.
Hmm.
But we didn't have little boys. We didn't have to make the decision. And if we did, there's no way on earth I would do that to a child. I'm not saying I would even do it to any children now. It was just that I was fighting so many other fires and I was in remediation for so many reasons. It was like, okay, I'll just do the circs this morning. Like 3 babies. They seem to be okay. I don't know. And then later I'm like, God, what a nightmare. Like what another thing that we just are just doing to little people that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, anyways, if you're worried about your kid, if this trend continues, you may end up actually putting your kid into a category that is the minority
Hmm.
if you are going to go through with this unnecessary, completely aesthetic, so to speak, procedure.
Hmm.
Not that like a circumcised penis is more beautiful or anything. It's just what people have said for years. And by the way, everybody listening, I am circumcised. My parents had no qualms whatsoever. My dad was circumcised. I'm circumcised. I'm never going to get that foreskin back. And
Yeah.
the glands of my penis is probably a little roughened up from not having a protective layer on it now for 38 years. I may not have as much sensitivity in the tip of my penis, but I'll never know.
Right.
So it's not a matter of like whipping my mom and dad or whipping myself. It's just what it is.
Yeah. And the
And
thing
all
is, like 15 years ago, actually longer than that, my good friend got pregnant a couple years before I did. So her son is about to turn 18, I think. And I was there, I was in the birthing room with her when he was born. I was there through her pregnancy. And she was like, I'm not circumcising him. And I gave her a lashing. I'm a 26-year-old thinking I'm like, you've got to, like, I'm like the husband, like, you have to do this. And she's like, no, I'm not doing it. And I had to call her, almost 20 years later and say, man, you were right. You were right all those years ago. And so if my daughter had been a boy, I will say back in 19,
probably would have.
2007, I probably would have circumcised because there wasn't, these conversations were not happening. And this conversation is super
Yeah.
taboo still and will still piss off a ton of people that listen to this show, I'm sure. But I feel like we got to have these conversations because, like you said, if we're only thinking about life and death, we're not thinking about the right things. We have to think about the health of the mother and the child after
Yeah.
this experience. It's not just life and death. Yes, that's primary, but like it's not the only thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just one of those, one of those things. There are possible complications. There is possible, scarring, and there are occasionally reasons that we should circumcise, but those
Mm.
are not 90% of kids as they were when I was, born, when I was a little baby. And frankly, I think I had one kid who I remember being uncircumcised and he did get made fun of. So I get it.
Mm.
Like our
Yeah. Oh,
generation
yeah. I
is,
mean, my husband was like, we made fun of any of the kids that were
yeah,
uncircumcised, and that was his thing. He doesn't want his son to be ridiculed and made fun of. He's already got a special needs big sister, and he's like, I don't want him to get made fun of for something else.
yeah,
And I'm just like, kids are gonna make fun of other kids. Like, it's just kids are gonna be mean. Like, we have
yeah.
to
It's just what
be
they do.
a safe place for him and teach him how to be resilient and teach him, how to have confidence. And
Yeah,
that's all we can do. Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. So I guess going back to the whole
Oh, yeah.
consent thing, I think that can be a tough one for women as well.
Yeah. So for a long time, I think it was important to me that people have the education and then they advocate for themselves. And I think this
Mhm.
is still I think it's a little bit of a juvenile way of looking at this whole problem. But frankly, yeah, starting off right off the bat, yes, you have the ability to say no to everything. The problem
Mhm.
is, especially for women, is that in for most women growing up in our country, you've been um, sort of subjugated to a sort of secondary role in decision making for most of your life.
Mhm.
It's just
Mhm.
the reality. I'm not saying every person listening is not strong or not talented or not CEO material. I'm just saying that you have been sort of conditioned within a patriarchal society such that sometimes you probably, at the bar when a guy's had a couple too many drinks, he gets a little too close. Sometimes you might find yourself nodding and smiling in
Yeah.
order to preserve your own life.
Mhm.
Just going to
Yeah.
throw it out there. I've got a wife who was a bartender for 10 years. And if she hadn't been behind the bar, she probably would be dead.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
it's just the reality. So walking home late at night, walking through garages,
Yes.
men don't carry mace. Why do women carry mace? It's because
Right.
women are constantly under suspicion of the men in whatever setting they might be. Now,
Yeah.
that is only relevant to this conversation, not to talk about rape and violence and all of this, but when a woman has deferred to either a male priest, a male politician, a male commander in chief, a male physician for the most part, their whole life. Now we're expecting them to suddenly have a armor, superwoman style, walking into the hospital and saying, "No thanks, I've got this." It's
Right.
just not a part of our conditioning of young women.
Yeah.
So my new tone is, yeah, education and empowerment is important, but you need to start saying no thank you from the moment you have the idea you want to have kids. If
Mhm.
you really feel like you're going to exercise your autonomy, because what isn't going to work is you raise your voice, you pound your chest, you bring in the data and all this. Like, a doctor does not
They
fucking
don't
care.
care. They don't
They
care.
don't have any, they have 10 other people and they're just going to dismiss you,
Mhm.
tell the nurse to do the thing, and they're going to walk away. And then you're going to
Mhm.
say, I won. Like, no, they're just going to continue to pester you with those things. So, what actually works a lot differently is practicing no thank you, even when your friend calls you up to go to the movie, right? Practice saying no thank you and meaning it and just shutting up and just letting them now have to figure out, okay, they said no thank you. And it doesn't need to be rude. It's just, hey, I'm really not feeling like going out today. I think I'd
Mhm.
rather stay in. Instead of this whole walking around saying what you're actually feeling on the inside, because your intuition is really an authoritative knowledge. And if something doesn't feel like a yes to you, then saying yes is not going to go so well in the long run. So
Mm.
I don't recommend getting your birth plan notarized. Or, like, it doesn't matter. It's
They
not
don't care that
notary.
much.
A notary is just saying you are the person who signed this. It's not even a
Right.
legal document. Like, I don't know
No.
where people got these ideas, but it's so juvenile that you're going to go up with
Yep.
your dukes up, right? Like,
Yep.
you don't want to go in with your dukes up. You want to go in
No.
and just surrender to this process.
Right.
So advocacy from the male partner can be really helpful, but really, frankly, you as the woman need to actually start practicing saying no thank you, especially if it's maybe the first time you've ever said that to an authority
Mm.
figure in a white coat. A lot of us men need to practice this as well, but ultimately it's you who's going to be going through the C-section or having the thing happen. And
Mhm.
going back to my neighbor who lived across the street, she actually said to me, she's like, I really want to have a home birth, but frankly, I think that the weakest part of my personality is that I have a hard time saying no. I don't think it's reasonable for us for us to demand people suddenly become the staunch advocates that so many birth workers and doulas on Instagram, are trying to inspire. It doesn't work like that. We have to
Mm-mm.
actually change our whole
Mm-mm.
society again so that women who are pregnant are absolutely, we're at the service of them. How can I,
Mhm.
do you need me out of the room? Do you need me to like go away
Yep.
altogether? Like, I'm here for you in that way.
Yep.
Um, it's just I just don't see it working out the other way, where you walk in
Yep.
and your dukes are up. Like, you don't want to be in a flight or fight. You want to be surrendering. You want to be in your parasympathetic. You want to be like inward, like on your knees in prayer pose, just letting that baby roar through you. Like, that's
Yep.
that's what a birth can look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said, that's the reason why I didn't go to Northside with my birth plan, because they would have looked at me and been like,
That's right.
get out of here. Like, you're getting a hep lock. Like, we're doing all this, even though your baby's going to be born in like half an hour or whatever, we're still
That's right.
going to go through all these protocols, and you got to do it our way. So there is a certain amount of, like, you have to know what you're getting into. And like I said, I wanted to do a home birth, but I had to compromise, because it's not just, there's two of us in the relationship. And I got a lot of flack from people that follow me when I, had talked about that when I was going through pregnant. Well, it's you, it's your body, it's your baby. And I'm like, well, that's just not how I conduct my marriage.
Right.
That's how I don't choose to conduct my marriage that way. But yeah, I mean, there's no way in hell that they would have honored that piece of paper if I went to that hospital. And
That's
so
right.
I think, yeah, there's a lot of this stuff on Instagram about advocating and having a doula and saying no to this and saying no to that. But if you walk into the wrong place, they're not going to even listen to you. And you might say no, and they might just do it anyway. Like, that's what I have seen a lot of, is just that they just are going to
Mm.
do what they're going to do. And I read from all the birth, well, I'm not on those anymore, but reading from all the birth forums, all these women that are just completely being traumatized in these hospitals. It's a big shame.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to to help all these women out there, but it's just a conversation, I feel like, that needs to be brought out to the forefront.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, this topic that we're discussing right now, again, is a societal conversation. This is
Mhm.
not a matter of, right or wrong or whatever else,
Mhm.
because like I said a couple times now, our our healthcare system is a market-driven system. People
Mhm.
are demanding the care that they're getting.
Mhm.
Nobody's going in there and saying, "I don't want this thing." You don't go to the hospital to get the home birth experience. That's not what
No.
they do there.
Yeah.
99% of people's insurance companies are paying for a hospital-based birth in that exact way.
Mhm.
So why are we demanding that they be different for this 1%? It's just not feasible.
Mm-mm.
It's not
Mm-mm.
feasible. This is what the system was developed to do, was to
Right.
provide you complete a sense of relief of all accountability and responsibility. We're going to take
Mhm.
care of everything. And that means if they're taking the burden of responsibility, they're going to decide what the outcomes are. And
Mhm.
their outcomes are blood loss, infection rates, NICU admission for the baby, whatever, death, ICU admission,
Mhm. Yeah.
C-sections, like blood loss. Those are all important things. But that's all that they care about, because that's what consumers have demanded of them now for about 100 years, since the Rockefellers and Carnegies
Yeah.
invested into this system.
Yeah.
So we don't go to the hardware. I always say this: we don't go to the hardware store to buy, like, your groceries to make soup today.
Right.
You don't go to your grocery store to buy lumber. Like, know where you're going for your healthcare and what they provide. And to
Mhm.
expect them at the hardware store to provide you with groceries is just as silly as going to the hospital and expecting, to be left alone and
Mhm.
completely cared for, you put at the center of your care. It's just not reasonable. It's
Mm-mm.
like unrealistic to expect that in many ways.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's sad, but that's just the way it works, and oh, yeah, I just hope that, more women can start to become aware of this information and just
Yeah.
understand that there are other choices, and that we need to just keep talking about this stuff, and support women too, because this whole conversation is super polarizing. There's just people that are like, oh, well, you're just gonna have your baby at home, and there's higher risk for death. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit, because I know that's something that you talk about a little bit, as a home birth, which is something I didn't do, but obviously. But what are your thoughts around, like, home birth rates are more deadly, or
Mm.
how do you see that from your perspective? I know that's a big giant can of worms.
Yeah, it's a big question, but frankly, a lot of the things that we're most worried about happening in pregnancy, that the OBGYN say, if I hadn't been there correctly, they say, if I hadn't been there, this baby or you would have died,
Mm.
right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
hemorrhages, it's the fetal distress,
Mm-hmm.
it's the, whatever. Um, and they're right. But the
Yeah.
problem with that is that you're missing the precursor to those things that developed, that required the emergency C-section
Mm.
or the whatever. they were generally precipitated by these interventions that we are utilizing on a very, very routine basis. And none of those interventions are done at home. I
Right.
don't speed up births when I'm at home.
No, you don't do Pitocin.
I don't even put my hand in the vagina until there's a baby's head there. Like I
Mm.
don't do anything. I literally just sit there. I've also earned the right to sit back and just watch things unfold. Like I know when a bad thing is happening. And generally
Mhm.
speaking, bad things aren't happening. But if something is bad is happening, certainly let's go to the hospital.
Yeah.
But so it's like the wrong question, right? People ask,
Mhm.
is home birth, is
Is
home
it
birth
safe?
safe?
Mhm.
There are certainly, you're not entitled to have a safe birth, whatever that
Mhm.
means, because safety is a very relative thing. So
Mhm.
if you told me, and I had a client just like this, actually, this is a really great story for you and your audience. So she had 4 C-sections. Her fourth,
Mm.
at his 6-month visit, went to the pediatrician, got all the shots, and was paralyzed within a couple days after.
Oh God.
Has a breathing tube, has a feeding tube, can't use his arms or legs. He has a bag of skin and
Oh
bones
God.
just being fed artificially. And she's now a vaccine, advocate, and
Mhm.
she wanted to have a home birth. She's like, I'm not going back. Like, I'm too traumatized by that
Mm.
experience. And so I was like, shit, I mean, 4 C-sections. That's kind
Yeah.
of unheard of, but we did it.
Mhm.
And she
Wow.
ultimately decided to have an elective repeat C-section at like 42 weeks. But the point there was that she couldn't, um, her sense of safety needed to be recalibrated, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And once she felt fully supported, I think she was like, you know what? I think it's okay to have a C-section. But I
Mhm.
think she had been so traumatized by people doing things on her behalf in the name of
Mhm.
safety that never felt right for her. And that's why she
Right.
had this deep psychological apprehension. And so a lot of people would say having a home birth after 4 C-sections is unsafe. Well,
Mhm.
according to who? Like, what are your values? Riding a motorcycle is also unsafe, according to
Mhm.
some people, but I do that. Um, maybe not getting a vaccine is unsafe,
Right.
it's just a matter of our value systems are misaligned with this primary outcome of healthy mom, healthy baby. Um, so frankly, if we're even just talking about morbidity and mortality, I ask anybody, like, go and query, just go ask, just casually ask a NICU nurse, that's the neonatal intensive care unit.
Mhm.
Ask them how many babies there are coming in from the home. 0? 1?
Mhm.
Um, Fortunately or unfortunately, there's not a lot of home birth babies that end up in the NICU. Is
Yeah.
that because there's a whole bunch of dead home birth babies? No, it's not. Those babies are just fine at home. In fact,
Mhm.
moments after birth, they were with their mom where they're going to sleep the rest of the day.
Right.
So
Right.
so it's if you then ask, okay, well then where are those babies coming from? They're not coming from the stupid, uneducated, midwifery led births at home. Where are they coming from? They're coming
From
from
the hospital.
otherwise probably very healthy moms who
Yeah.
ended up with a crunked out baby as a result of all the interventions.
Mhm.
But we also saved the baby's life. And if we hadn't been there, us OBGYNs, to operate emergently to get the baby out, maybe that baby would have died. And so the OBGYNs are right. They did save the baby's life, but they put the baby in a precarious
Right, because
position
of all the
of
interventions.
all the interventions. So it's a hard
Yeah.
question. And if you ask an OBGYN, is it safe? No, because I've seen these horrible things happen. But
Mhm.
those horrible things wouldn't have happened had they been at home because we don't even do those things that lead to the emergencies and the catastrophes.
Yep.
And there are occasionally babies that die. I just heard from a partner of mine, baby died, meconium aspiration syndrome.
Oh
I heard from another midwife a couple months ago. Mom died of what's called an amniotic fluid embolism. There's nothing you can do unless they're in an operating room with an anesthesiologist right there to put a breathing tube in to ventilate you and keep you on life support. You're going to die.
God.
That happened at home. But that is again a part of the conversation. That
Yeah.
doesn't minimize or diminish the reality that maybe the previous 999 births that this midwife attended were completely healthy, uncomplicated, flawless, unmedicated births. But we focus on that one and we're like, aha!
Mhm. Yep,
Well, what
there it
about
is.
all the shit that's happening at the Northside Hospital in Atlanta because they're overly interventive?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
complicated story.
It is complicated, and even I went to a midwifery practice hoping that it would be a little bit more natural, but I was there at 39 weeks and she was like, well, I was 43 when I gave birth. And she's like, you're 43. So you're 39 weeks. If he's not here by exactly when you hit 40 weeks, we're going to have to induce. And I was like, why? She's like, because your chances of him dying after 40 weeks they just keep going up exponentially because of your age. And I
Hmm.
was like, I don't want to, I was freaking out and I'm like calling my friend who's a homeopath. I'm like, what can I
Hmm.
take? What remedy can I take to induce
We
labor?
got to get this going.
She's like, nope, you're not doing that. She's like, you can just say no, that you don't want the induction. And, my daughter was born 39 weeks, 2 days, and my son was born 39 weeks, 5 days. So he was
Wow.
and came on his own, thank God, because I was freaking out about Pitocin because I'm like, that one is
Yeah.
that one scares me. It
Yeah.
really scares
Yeah.
me. You hear a lot of horror stories, and it's not the same thing as oxytocin, like a lot of people say. It can be a
Not.
dangerous drug. Yeah.
Yeah, the conversation around dating is probably, when you asked me in the beginning, what's like a common question I get, I've kind of riffed on a number of them, but the dating thing is really interesting because
Mm.
we are coming up with every reason in the world now to intervene earlier and earlier. But the problem is we
Hmm.
don't know exactly how far along you are. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the dating calculators are based on a 28-day cycle. And even
Right.
if you generally have a 28-day cycle, maybe that cycle was 25 days, maybe it was
Right.
40 days, like who knows? And you don't, the moment you ovulate is generally not the day that you're conceiving or that it's
Right.
implanting. So like this whole conversation on gestational age it's a guess, but it's not exact. And as we start to induce more and more babies at 39 weeks, even though we're seeing better outcomes for the mom, I'm not sure why we're evacuating these babies so early. So there was
Hmm.
a study back in, I think it was 2017, 2018, called the Arrive trial, which helped to justify this 39-week induction thing. It could have been used to say, oh, if we have to induce at 39 weeks, we shouldn't have to worry.
Mm.
But instead now it's a justification to induce everybody at 39 weeks. And there was just a study that came out this year in the Gray Journal. It's the other big OBGYN journal that demonstrated that if you need cervical ripening with a balloon and you get a
Mm.
dose of prostaglandins, right? This is the induction process at 39 weeks, that you have an even faster birth, whether it's C-section or vaginal birth is not relevant. You have a shorter time from the start of your induction to the time that you give birth. If we also, when we take that balloon out, this is a balloon that we inflate inside the cervix to help open it, if we then break your waters at that time. So now we have what I suspect is going to happen from this type of research is that now we're going to say, oh, great, 39 weeks. The procedure is give you a dose of misoprostol into the vaginal posterior fornix behind the cervix. We place a balloon, and when the balloon comes out in a couple hours, we rupture your waters. That will be the 3-step process for every single induction, almost every single induction in the United States. I will put that into this conversation and we will check in 10 years and see if I was right. But
Mm.
it's a little bit disturbing, but that's what we're studying. That's what the research wants to show is how many interventions can we do to speed this process up? Maternity units are making a lot of money for hospitals. That
Oh yeah.
Northside Hospital, 60 to 70% of its income is coming from its maternity unit. So
Oh yeah.
more people in and out, the faster, the more money that the execs make. And unfortunately, that is a part of the conversation, which
Yeah.
sucks. But
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Healthcare here is money.
uh,
It's all about the money, and yeah, it's a whole other conversation for
yeah,
sure. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I feel like I could probably talk to you for at least another 90 minutes, but what what question did I not ask you around this topic that you think maybe I should have, or what kind of thought would you like to leave people with out of this conversation?
I really, I appreciate the conversation, Sarah. You're a delight. I really love your personal story. I love the way that this conversation flowed. I love that we weren't limited in
Mm.
our language and not being censored and all of that. I just love being able to talk frankly.
Yeah, this has been amazing. Tell people where they can find you if they want to join your program, work with
Sure.
you, all the things.
Yeah. So the pregnancy and postpartum educational program is called Born Free Method. That's at bornfreemethod.com. My website is Beloved Holistics, but I really recommend everybody just go check out Born Free Method. That's probably where you're going to get. I mean, you could pay me to do an hour consult every week if you wanted, or you can just pay a little bit more and get lifetime access to the most comprehensive pregnancy and postpartum program on the planet. I mean, and we know that because I've taken a lot of the other programs and we
Mm,
just needed something else. So it comes with 12 months of weekly calls. It comes
mm.
with there's going to be over 350 citations. We're adding about 50 new lessons. It is a massive undertaking. It is my magnum opus. It's everything. So go to bornfreemethod.com. And if you want to reach out to me, probably the best way is Instagram,
Mm.
Nathan Riley, OBGYN. And I answer all of my own texts and all that. So
Amazing.
Sarah, it's been a very grateful to meet you in this way and to have some time to break bread. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, the full unedited chat. If you're still here listening, lots of things that we covered today that, again, would be considered very taboo, that I was unable to put on my YouTube channel because I don't want to lose my YouTube channel. So if you did enjoy this conversation, please consider going on over to Spotify or Apple and leaving the show up to a 5-star review, sharing it out with a friend, with a family member. That is how we continue to improve our health and have these sorts of conversations that a lot of people are actually really trying hard to shut down right now. So it is important that we can still have these avenues to discuss these things freely. And make sure to support the show if you enjoy conversations like this. And if you are looking for a last-minute gift for a friend or a loved one, make sure to head on over to the show notes and check out my December specials, where you can gift any of these things to a friend, a family member, a loved one. And I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Viva Rays and to Upgraded Formulas for continuing to sponsor the show. And I will talk with you again next week.